Hello and welcome, everybody. My name is Jakob. I'm a medical doctor and professor of artificial intelligence and medicine here at TU Dresden in Germany. I'm very happy to be here today with you. I'm very happy to give this webinar on AI in cancer research at Istanbul Aydın University. Thank you specifically to Arta Armani, who has put all of this together. So I will speak for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then I hope we have the chance to discuss. Let's get started. I will speak about AI in cancer research and oncology. These are my disclosures. So let's look at the situation in oncology, how we treat cancer patients, and how this has evolved over the years. And one thing is very clear, and that's oncology is becoming more and more complex. Let's look at lung cancer, and let's look at the year 2010, so 15 years ago. We only had a couple of chemotherapy drugs available back then to treat our patients, so not really much to offer in advanced or metastatic tumors. Now, in 2024 and 2025, we have many, many options. And this is just an example of our German guidelines, how we treat lung cancer. I mean, you don't have to read the details. It's just about showing that we have these large decision trees that we typically follow when we make decisions in clinical practice. This is also the same situation in our European ESMO guidelines, any guideline, and basically any tumor type. So oncology is becoming more and more complex, and we need decision support that helps us as medical doctors to make the right decisions. Now, many of these decisions in these decision trees are um, are biomarkers, are based on properties of the tumor that we can measure by some experimental method. And it could be the presence of mutations, it could be other genetic alterations in the tumor, it could be also properties of the patient, immunological properties, etc. But we need these quantitative biomarkers to make these decisions. And all of these problems are something where AI can potentially help us. And I'm going to give you a few examples about this. Now, let's look at artificial intelligence and how the methods and their application to cancer research has evolved over time. From a methods point of view, the simplest AI model that you can build is what we call a single domain, single purpose model. That means a model that can do exactly one task, for example, to predict whether there's cancer present in an image, yes or no. And this model also is specialized for one single domain. That means one specific type of data, for example, pathology images or radiology images. Now, single domain, single purpose AI models work really well. If you have enough data, you can train AI models for a specific purpose, and this can work as good as a human or better. Um, However, the techniques have evolved recently, and now we have other options, which include multimodal models. That means an AI model that can take different types of data as an input, for example, images plus genetic data, or foundation models, by which you can take a large amount of unlabeled data and then train an AI model on it with a technique that we call self-supervised learning. And then you can use this model for many, many downstream purposes. Or most recently, generalist models. With that, we mean an AI model that can basically perform any task. So just like a large language model, such as ChatGPT, that you can ask many things and it will attempt to answer. Of course, the more complex an AI system gets, the more difficulties are associated with it. For example, how can you guarantee that the answers are correct, and how can we approve this as a medical device? So, in the European Union, any AI model that we use in cancer research and that we use in oncology, basically for our patients, needs the CE mark, and that comes with regulatory requirements and that need to be fulfilled. So this is much easier to do for the single purpose, single domain models. In terms of data that AI models can analyze in cancer research and oncology, it's basically any data that we have in a digital form. But for an AI model to train it and to apply it, it's really helpful to have digital data in a large quantity. That means we need data that's basically available for ideally every single patient with cancer. So real world data. And this is what we are mostly interested in. Some examples are pathology images, radiology images, natural language, and genomic data. These types of data are available basically for every single patient with cancer. And so it's a very good substrate. It's a very good resource to use to apply AI to. Among these data types, specifically pathology images are very interesting because they contain a lot of pixels. So here, if you see on this slide, we have one pathology image of a lung cancer patient up here and a CT scan of the same lung cancer patient down here. One pixel up here is one pixel down here. So you can see that a pathology slide has much more pixels than the whole radiology and chest CT series. So there is potentially a lot of information that we can extract from these. From a methods point of view, analyzing image data is very simple because we have super well established methods already that can help us with many different image analysis tasks. For example, with image classification. So imagine you have an AI model that you're training to classify images into either category A or category B. Well, this is basically available off the shelf and quite simple to apply. And we are applying such methods to such data, histopathology or radiology images, as you can see here. Let me give you some more specific examples for AI-based biomarkers in histopathology. And there is a crucial distinction that we have to make. There's basically two classes that we have to consider. One is strongly supervised deep learning methods, by which your task is to analyze something that you have predefined. For example, you know that you're interested in this pathology slide, that you're interested in determining the amount of brown staining on the cell membranes. Well, then you can train an AI model to detect the cells, then identify the membranes, and then identify the amount of brown staining on them. On the other hand, there is a technique called weakly supervised deep learning, by which you do not know exactly what the model should look at. So you can take the whole slide and you can tell the model, well, here's 100 slides of treatment responders. Here's 100 slides of treatment non-responders. Now find the properties in the image that are associated with this. So you basically train directly on a clinical label and you don't know exactly what to look for in the image. And this is potentially more powerful, but it's also potentially more difficult because you need probably more data to train such models. Now, some examples from our group. Well, this is already now 6 years ago, where we did this study on deep learning in histopathology images of colorectal cancer, and we showed that it's possible to predict genetic alterations directly from the pathology slides. In this case, a very important biomarker in colorectal cancer called MSI, microsatellite instability. And typically you would do an immunohistochemistry or PCR test to measure this. What we showed here is that you can just do deep learning analysis of the whole slide image and you can predict the molecular alteration status for MSI. So this showed us that in tumors, the genotype determines the phenotype, and just by looking at the phenotype through the lens of a deep learning model, you can basically guess the underlying genotype. And this is now even available as part of actually several products that are available for clinical use in different locations. These AI methods are not black boxes; they are explainable, so we can make them understandable. We can afterwards see which areas in the tissue were mostly relevant for the model to make its prediction. Another example is HRD, homologous recombination deficiency, another super important biomarker that can occur that's relevant in many cancer types. If you have a tumor and you have HRD, there are many situations where you can be treated with a certain class of drugs called PARP inhibitors. And so we are very interested in finding HRD tumors, and several studies by us and our other groups have shown that it's possible to use deep learning to predict HRD status from histopathology slides. Also, it's possible to go beyond this and use pathology slides and analyze them with deep learning to predict gene expression signatures that are related to certain treatments, for example, immunotherapy. So in this study by our friend Julien Calderaro from Paris, they deep learning was used to predict gene expression signatures for immunotherapy in liver cancer, HCC. And then subsequently, this was validated in another large cohort of patients that were treated with immunotherapy. And this was indeed predictive for treatment response. Another study by a team at MD Anderson in the US showed that you can use deep learning on radiology images. Basically, the same principle, you use the images, you train deep learning models, in this case to predict immunotherapy response in lung cancer directly from these images. And this also worked quite well and validated quite well. You can also do this in a multimodal way, as I have initially already shown. It's possible to build AI models that can not just take one single type of input, but they can take different types of input, for example, different types of pathology stains, such as in this case, or even pathology images plus something completely different, such as genomic information, genomic data. And with combining multiple data types, it's often possible to reach a bit of a higher performance on prediction of endpoints. And in this study, it was shown that you put together different types of images of pathology stains in colorectal cancer, and it's then much better, much easier to predict clinical outcomes such as treatment response directly from the images with deep learning. Now, all of the examples that I have shown you represent different categories of AI-based biomarkers. And here, what I'm showing you here is an attempt to classify this. And this is actually an ongoing project in our European Society for Medical Oncology, ESMO. This was presented at the ESMO conference in 2024. And it's still ongoing and will be hopefully published in 2025. This initiative is called the EBI, the ESMO Scale of Oncology Biomarkers with AI. And we basically distinguish three classes of biomarkers. One is Class A, very simple AI systems for biomarker quantification. So just using AI to quantify the amount of brown stain in an immunohistochemistry slide. Class B is something more complex. It's the prediction of existing biomarkers from other data types. For example, the examples I showed you, predicting MSI status from H&E slides. Class C is completely novel biomarkers, which could be even either prognostic or predictive. And for example, predicting clinical outcomes from patients directly from pathology slides or from radiology images or from text data or any other data. So these classes are really not just related to pathology, but can apply basically to any any data type. And this is ongoing, so stay tuned for the result, which should hopefully be published later in 2025. One thing I want to mention is that all of this, I've shown you some academic studies, but many of these studies have already resulted in commercial products. We need commercial products because this is the only way you're going to achieve the regulatory approval, such as the CE marking in the European Union. So basically, once the academic studies have concluded, somebody has to turn it into a product that can be certified and that can be then put on the market. And this is a very nice study by our friends, Manuel Saltoteus group, published in 2023, where they analyzed the European landscape and showed that for different tasks in pathology, several products are already on the market. So this is, of course, outdated. Nowadays, there are many more, but very interesting potentially to see that this is already applicable in clinical routine. Of course, the situation is that most pathologists and most other diagnosticians do not use AI for their current workflows anywhere globally, really. So neither in the EU nor in the US, people are using this a lot, and there are many hurdles that are here on the way. We have discussed some of them in this paper 2 years ago, where we showed that basically yeah, there's many problems that need to overcome for people to use this. So there are many steps to be taken for AI to reach the real world of oncology. First, there have to be academic proof of concept studies. Then there have to be it has to be productized. It has to be approved. But then, additionally, other hurdles have to be overcome. However, as I showed you in the beginning, the field is moving very fast, and I have now spoken about essentially single domain, single purpose models. So AI models that are trained on one single data type or maybe multiple data types, but they all serve one single purpose. So you have one AI model for predicting biomarkers in colorectal cancer, one for predicting biomarkers in lung cancer, etc. Of course, this is not the end of the story because now we have new technologies available, and I'm going to show you some. And of course, the most important technology here nowadays is large language models, LLMs. Everybody is of course familiar with these, but as a recap, these are just large artificial neural networks based on the transformer architecture that have been trained with self-supervised learning on a large amount of data, text from the internet, so basically any text from the internet, then have been refined with human feedback, and then you get a large language model in a product such as ChatGPT. ChatGPT by the company OpenAI is just, of course, one out of many large language models, but it was the first one that got a lot of public interest. And what's I think very interesting is that this is really being used by by many people. So I really like this plot here, which shows the basically of this different technology platforms, the rate of uptake, and you can see that many major platforms such as Netflix or Twitter or Spotify, they needed like almost 10 years to reach 100 million users, whereas ChatGPT reached this in a matter of a few days. And now, of course, it's being used by much more people, by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. So it has basically arrived in our society quite rapidly. Of course, there is a certain temptation to use large language models just to write your scientific paper, but I can tell you, don't do it. Don't do this. Some people are doing it. But it's not good to do this without really using your human brains. So you get examples like this. This was a published article. It's out there on the internet, and yeah, it contains some traces of an AI model. Having written the article, of course, what we are doing, of course, what we can do is use these AI models to help us um, improve our first drafts for papers, or find internal inconsistencies, or help us with spell checking, etc. So very specific tasks. But of course, it's still, I mean, it's still humans who should be doing most the scientific work. Um, how are large language models influencing what we are doing in cancer research? Well, what we published already, 2 years ago was uh, basically statement saying that large language models should not be used as knowledge databases, but as scientific reasoning engines. And that means if you ask ChatGPT or another large language model just a question that depends on knowledge. So, for example, what are all the approved treatments for lung cancer in the European Union? Well, then you might get a good response, but you might get a bad response, and you might get hallucinations, so wrong responses, or it might be outdated, etc. So it's very it's very difficult to use large language models as knowledge databases. However, if you use them as reasoning engines, and that means you take a scientific article and you would upload it to ChatGPT and you ask it summarize the three most important points from this article, well then it's typically going to do a very good job because and the rate of hallucinations is much lower in these cases. So using large language models to parse and digest information is typically much better than to use them as a knowledge database. And here, this what we have done 2 years ago in 2023 was to outline basically all the ways in which large language models could be employed in clinical routine, for example, in clinical research, patient care, and also education. Here is down here is the link. Feel free to look it up in more detail if you're interested. Well, now let me show you some examples of how large language models can help us in cancer research. And some of the examples are really simple and really almost boring, right? So one example is to extract structured information from unstructured data. Again, these were studies that we did 2 years ago where we took a large language model and we gave it a lot of text, for example, just pathology reports, like you get 2 pages of a pathology report in non-structured format for each cancer patient. And then we took a large language model to extract certain pieces of information that we were interested in, like TNM status, etc., and then evaluated how reliable the extraction was, and we found that it's actually very reliable. And this even works with local large language models, so you don't have to send your data to the cloud. You can just use your own computer. Even on my own MacBook, basically, you can run super decent large language model, for example, Meta's Llama 3.2 or 3.3. These models are really, some of them are really lightweight and can be run locally and can do tasks such as information extraction. This can also be used for other tasks that are relevant in healthcare, such as automatic determination of computer readable codes. So imagine you have unstructured notes, and then your objective is to convert them into computer readable codes, such as ICD-10 codes that we need in our hospital for billing, for quality control, but also for scientific work. And this also works very well, as a lot of recent evidence also has shown. Of course, as you know, large language models cannot just analyze language, but can also be trained on images along with language. And actually, many of the commercially available products in the large language model space already have this capability. And so you can, even to the regular ChatGPT, you can upload even pathology image and ask it questions about it, and will give you, in many cases, quite reasonable answers. Of course, others, such as in this paper on PathChat that was published in 2024 by our friends at Harvard, they trained basically a custom pathology specific large language model, vision language model, and this worked actually very well and outperformed these generalist vision language models. So you can, the question on whether we should use large language models that are specific for medicine or whether we can just use a universal large language model that is not domain specific is still undecided, basically. But of course, you can get really, really good results if you train vision language models specifically for a certain problem. Now, this is, however, not the end of the story, because there is much more that large language models can do. One of the things that I already mentioned before is they can parse the documents for you. So what you can do is, if you're interested in how you would treat a patient with lung cancer, is you could just phrase this as a question and enter it into ChatGPT. For example, we call this a zero-shot application. So what you could do is you could just ask it which treatment options are available for a 60-year-old patient with lung cancer. And then you will get a certain response. However, in this case, the response is not going to be very detailed. It's typically going to be very generic and oftentimes not really helpful, like here. However, what you can alternatively do is you use the large language model as a reasoning engine. So you take the latest guidelines on lung cancer treatment, you just provide them to the model via contextual some retrieval technique, for example, in context learning or retrieval augmented generation. And there's many methods how you can make an information source accessible to a model. And then you can ask the same question based on this document. What are the approved treatments for lung cancer patients? And in this case, you are going to get a much more detailed response. I'm not saying that all of this is fully correct, but it's typically much more detailed, and also in some cases, in some products, not in some products, you will have basically a link to the original source. We have built our own custom retrieval augmented generation implementation and used large language models together with information sources for medical problem solving. And this was recently published here, where we showed that with this approach, you can get really high quality medical reasoning. And of course, there's even newer research available that's showing that with even later models, you can get even much better performance. One thing that I think is one application that I think is especially interesting is to use the vision language capabilities of these large language models. And because in clinical routine, we often sketch out our cases visually. So here we basically sketched out, this was based on this is a visual sketch of a liver cancer patient where it was sketched out that the patient had a diagnosis in July 2018 with multifocal hepatocellular carcinoma, then obtained 4 rounds of this chemoembolization treatment, and then had a basically progression of the tumor in 2023. So this case comes from the BCLC conference, one of the world's most important conferences on liver cancer in Barcelona. And basically, I just took a screenshot of this sketch, and I provided the clinical guidelines for liver cancer to the model, and then asked it, based on these guidelines, what is the correct treatment for this patient here? And the response was very detailed and mostly correct. So a certain treatment was recommended, and that's indeed written in the guidelines. There's also possibly other treatments in the guidelines, but this shows that if you use large language models correctly, you can use them in many different ways. You can use them with text input, you can use them with visual input. But if you provide this knowledge in trusted sources, you can get really high quality responses. Large language models can do many, many things, and here is another example. So here in this basically fun project which we did on the side, and we use large language models to analyze clinical trial data. So basically we used 4 large clinical trials and obtained their raw data in basically a large Excel table, and then used a large language model, in this case GPT-4, to write computer code to analyze this data set, and then building a machine learning model to predict the trial outcome. And then we evaluated whether this was correct and whether it followed the same steps as the original trial evaluation had. And we found that even it was even in some cases even better than the original clinical trial. So basically now in one afternoon, you can do the whole statistical analysis of several large clinical trials if you use large language models. And here in this study, we provided some evidence and some benchmark for this. But of course, how can all of this be taken together? And the solution, the answer is with AI agents. So in many of the examples that I've shown you here before, the AI model, the large language model, basically accesses additional functionality. For example, here it accesses external knowledge sources. Here it accesses the capabilities of writing and executing computer code, also of reading data, reading large tables. And if you take this thought further, then you can build really complex workflows that are built on a large language model that um, can basically make a strategy for a certain problem. For example, let's say you have a very difficult patient case, then the model could make a strategy for how this patient case could be solved. For example, what is the right treatment for this specific patient? It could then access a knowledge database and retrieve the knowledge. It could also access other tools, such as a web search tool or a computer code interpreter or image analysis tools or genetic data analysis tools, and then repeat this until an answer is found and then give a response. And so this is a workflow that we call an agentic system, which we have shown here in this study to give, and this actually gives us much better results than just using the large language model in a zero-shot way. Such agent workflows can also help in cancer research. So this is a recent article that has just come out in Nature Cancer, where we have developed basically a conceptual framework for how AI agents could be used for pharmaceutical research, where basically a human can make a high-level request to a large language model, and it could then plan the steps needed to fulfill this request, call tools sequentially, think about the results, iterate on this, and then in the end summarize the result and give it back to a human. So these complex workflows are now suddenly possible with AI agents, and these AI agents at their core just rely on a typical normal large language model. There is no magic involved here, and I think this is going to be the most important topic for the next couple of years going forward. So how will clinical routine in the treatment of cancer patients be influenced by AI in the future? And in the past, our view on this was heavily biased towards image analysis tasks, because even in 2016, we had very good image analysis AI systems, and we could see on the horizon that these could be used for the analysis of digital images in cancer patients. So what people generally expected in the past was that radiology and pathology would be clinical specialties that would be very much affected by artificial intelligence, and maybe surgery and medical oncology less so. But in the future, this is going to change. As I have shown you, we can use large language models, we can use agent-based platforms to solve even complex decision-making problems in oncology. And this comes in addition to the image analysis capabilities that AI systems have. The only field that's pretty safe still is surgery, because surgical robotics is still not driven by artificial intelligence. This might change in the future, but still at the moment it's entirely in humans' hands. So this is basically the projection and the very simplified outlook that I want to give you here. If you are interested in discussing these topics further, we now have a couple of minutes for discussions, but also there are some specific events, especially this one that I would like to invite you to, our first ESMO AI and Digital Oncology Congress organized by the ESMO in Berlin in Germany, November 2025. There will be a place for 1,000 participants, but this is quickly getting full. You can submit you can submit abstracts there to be considered as posters. So please save the date and sign up if you're interested. And with that, I would like to say thank you for your attention. I have reached the end of my presentation. I hope that I was able to show you some of the applications of AI in cancer research and oncology. This is a recent photo of our research group in Dresden in Germany. We are an interdisciplinary team. About half of the people are medical doctors or biologists. The other half of the people are computer scientists or engineers. And I think we need, and it's of course super international, people from all over the world. including Turkey. Um, so um, yeah, this is how I think we have to perform research in this space, because it's only possible if you bring diverse perspectives together. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to a discussion. Thank you very much.